Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. Thanks for joining me for this continuing discussion on the ways in which the Quran engages in dialogue with other scriptures and the ways in which Muslims can be in dialogue with people of other faiths. So today in particular, we're dealing with the question of how easy would it have been for God to create the universe? Like you think of the universe, how vast it is. We are on one planet within one system, our solar system. So think of the sun as being one star. There are 100 billion stars in our galaxy. And then there are 100 billion galaxies out there. Can you imagine the vastness of space and all of that? So how easy would it have been for God to create all of that? So the simple answer for that is what we need to look into and see how that is played out in the Quran and how it is also mentioned in other scriptures. So in the Quran, in a word, it says that when God decrees a thing, he only says to it be and it becomes. Let's look at a verse of the Quran that deals with that. A verse that comes to mind is in Surah Yasin. It's the 36th chapter of the Quran, where the people are denying that God will resurrect them from the dead. And they're asking, like, how can it be when our bones are all crumbled and everything? So in verse number 81, God says, can the one who created the heavens and the earth not easily resurrect these deniers? Yes, he can, for he is the master creator, all-knowing. All it takes when he wills something to be is simply to say to it, be. And it is just like that. Okay, the Arabic. أَوَلَيْسَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ بِقَادِرٍ عَلَىٰ أَن يَخْلُقَ مِثْلَهُمْ بَلَىٰ وَهُوَ الْخَلَّاقُ الْعَلِيمُ. Is the one who created the heavens and the earth not able to create the likes of them? On the contrary, he is the khallaq, like the super creator, and he is alim, he is knowledgeable, like he's all knowing. إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له kun fayakun. When he intends a thing, he only says to it be, and it becomes. So this statement, kun fayakun, is mentioned in the Quran some 8 different times in different places. So it's a recurring theme in the Quran. It's interesting to see how this plays out in other religious scriptures as well. So let's turn to the Bible. There are actually verses just 3 verses into the Bible in the book of Genesis. It says that God said, let there be light, and there was light. So the creation happens. And then in the Psalms, the 33rd Psalms, in the 6th verse, it says, by the word of the Lord, the heavens were made, and all their host by the breath of his mouth. So you have the idea here of God creating by his word. Similar statements can be found in the New Testament as well, especially in Hebrews and in the Petrine correspondences. It is interesting, however, that the Greek philosophers, in ancient times, they thought that God is unchanging and the universe is changing. So how could the unchanging God deal with the universe that is changing? There has to be an intermediary so that God is not affected by the changing nature of the universe. If he were to have a direct relationship with the universe, that might entail that there is some kind of change occurring in God as well. They didn't want that. So they said, there be an intermediary. A similar sort of idea seems to be in the Old Testament of the Christian Bible, which basically corresponds to the Jewish Bible, theirs being the Old Testament. They don't call it the Old Testament, they call it Tanakh, which is an acronym for, the Ketuvim, the Nevi'im, and the Torah. So they put it all together, Tanakh. Okay, in the book of Proverbs, in chapter 3, verses 19 and 20, we read that wisdom created the world. But who is wisdom? Wisdom itself seems to be something that God created. If we read chapter 8, verses number 22 forward, there it says quite explicitly that Yahweh created me. This is wisdom speaking. So wisdom is wisdom of God, but somehow personified, like my wisdom is with me, your wisdom is with you. But now wisdom is somehow given like a personality. So wisdom can speak and say that Yahweh created me. And then the idea then is that wisdom created the world. So this is the intermediary. That idea seems to have been taken further by a Jewish philosopher by the name of Philo, and because he was from Alexandria, they refer to him as Philo of Alexandria. He lived roughly contemporaneous with the prophet Jesus, on whom be peace. Now, Philo had the idea that, same basic concept, but he called it the logos, which is the word of God. He used another Greek word, which wisdom is Sophia, logos, the word. He thought that God created the universe through the logos. Now, for him, the logos was a kind of an abstract idea corresponding almost like to wisdom or reason, the wisdom or the reason of God. Now, this evolved further in the Gospel according to John. John's Gospel writes about Jesus, and John's Gospel says that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Or, to translate it differently, the Word was divine. And in fact, it seems to me that from my humble knowledge of the Greek, literally, this is how the Greek goes, that the Word not necessarily was God, but was divine. Now, those who interpret it from a Trinitarian point of view will try to make it that the Word was God, and then they will say this is a good way of expressing the Trinity in a short and concise manner. But it looks like what it's saying is that the Word was divine, but not necessarily God. It was like an otherworldly thing. And that Word is then what created the universe. So that Word is that intermediary, just like the one in the book of Proverbs that said that Yahweh created me. So this one is an intermediary being that creates on behalf of God. Now, John's Gospel even took it further by saying that this word of God then became flesh and dwelt among us as Jesus of Nazareth. So in a way, that would make Jesus the creator of the world. And how Christians have dealt with this over time, is a matter of history. A lot of different interpretations have been spawned from this. But I don't want to get too much into detail into that, except to say some took Jesus to be God, equal with the Father. Some said, no, he's a lesser sort of God, a lesser deity. That's like, for the example, the Jehovah's Witnesses. And some think that Jesus was only an adopted son of God, like, for example, the Ebionites in history, who do not exist as a group now. So you have a variety of beliefs about that. The interesting thing is that so many passages of the Quran and of the Bible say that God created the universe just simply by giving the word to it. And in response to the idea that Jesus is somehow the creator, and that might mean that he is God or God has taken for himself a son, this statement in the Quran that God says to it, be, and it becomes, I mentioned to you, it's 8 times in the Quran, right? If I didn't mention to you already, but I'm mentioning it now. 4 of those times, it's in reference to Jesus, on whom be peace, where God is saying, well, how can you say that God has taken for himself a son? إِذَا قَضَى أَمْرًا فَإِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ. When he decrees a thing, he only says to it, be, and it becomes. It's not that God is going to take for himself a son. Such is mentioned in the 3rd chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Imran, mentioned again in the 19th chapter of the Quran, and verse number 35 is mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah, and so on. What we come away with from the Quran is the clear expression that God is all powerful, and for him to bring things into existence, he just simply has to give the word. Kun fayakun. How does that play out in the lives of Muslims today? Many Muslims have just memorized these Arabic words because there are only 2 words that express it in Arabic. Kun, fayakun. And easy to remember. And Muslims might say this whenever, the question about God's power comes up. And it's especially relevant when you're facing the impossible odds. And somebody may be asking, how could this be possible? How is God going to be able to help you here? And the answer from Muslims very simply is, when God decrees a thing, he only says to it, kun fayakun. He says to it, be, and it becomes. The uplifting thing is that there is such wide agreement among the world's religions that God created simply by His word. This could be our entry point into dialogue with other people. When we talk to our friends or our classmates or our neighbors about Islam, this is one of the things we can discuss. God's omnipotence, which is agreed upon in so many different religions and in philosophies. So call them to the idea of the omnipotent God who creates just simply by giving the word. He says, be, and it is. Now, tomorrow, we'll discuss another important topic, and that is the differentiation between light and darkness. We mentioned a verse earlier in this discourse from Genesis chapter 1, verse number 3, where God says, let there be light. So what is it about light? And why is light often compared with divine guidance? And how does God relate to light? Let's talk about that tomorrow, inshallah. Please join me then. Peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Muslim Media Hub. There's so much that happens in this building.
This is where we produce the television show called Let the Quran Speak.
And there are podcasts, shows, and documentaries in progress.
As you can see, this building is very essential for the good work that we're doing. This is why we purchased it for $2 million.
We've already paid off about a third of this building.
And we have another $84,000 to pay this year.
We're looking for 84 kind souls to give $1,000 each. Can you be one of those people?
I hope you will. Or give whatever you can. Every dollar counts.
Thank you, and may Allah bless you and your loved ones this Ramadan and always.
Peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum and Ramadan Mubarak.
Assalamu alaikum.